Okay, welcome, folks. This is Jeff Morissette. I think got most of the people on the line. I haven't checked every 2015 funded project against the list of folks here. But as we talked about last month and then iterated a little bit with email, we were going to go through an update of the 2015 projects, this monthly check-in, and then have an update on the 2013 projects next month, and with that one being another week earlier to avoid the Christmas holiday. So appreciate people that are able to join and kind of adjusted the schedule to meet a week earlier. Wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving next week and enjoy that time. I think that, I don't know, Jill, if you want to show my screen or if you could get to the map of the areas might be a good place just to kind of highlight the 2015. And let me know if you want me to just share my screen.
All right. That might be easiest. I can just...
It looks like I can just do it. I don't know where the control comes in, but okay. So kind of going down the list as they show up here, which is evidently alphabetical. We'll just get a 5-minute check-in from these 5 2015 projects. And land use switching, there's been some change in the PI from David Hennessy to Chris Anderson. Landscape connectivity would be next. Nice to see Meredith on the line to give that, I believe. Sagebrush distribution, scenario planning in the Great Plains and Wind River would be the next 3. So let me just pause and see if there's any questions before we dig into the reports from these 5 projects. Okay. So, you know, certainly knowing that the projects are kind of just getting underway, and I think there's some, especially with the David Hennessy as the PI moving to Michigan State University, it's even you know, kind of was able to make a little less progress so far as we try to sort that out. And you know, I'll give my apologies to Chris Anderson and the group in advance of never having a project switch PI. So I don't know how that we're kind of making that up as we go of how that gets handled. But with that caveat, I'll hand it over to Chris if he's on the line to just kind of let us know what he's thinking and where the project's probably going to be going as opposed to what it's already done. Chris on? I don't know if I haven't looked at the list here. Maybe, yeah, Chris is on. I don't know if you're muted, Chris.
He's on the WebEx. It looks like maybe he's not on the phone though.
He's raising his hand on the WebEx. Is there a chat? Maybe communicate that way. I just sent a chat to Chris to see if he's on.
He's on and can hear us, but we can't hear him.
And I don't know, I don't think we do anything to like a group mute or anything like that on these calls, so I don't think I've ever done that.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Turns out there was a cord not completely plugged in. So sorry about the technical difficulty there. Okay, so did you want to, is there any screen sharing, anything like that can be done?
Sure, I can show your screen if you'd like.
Yeah, that would be great. And as as this is coming up, as Jeff said, our project was initially funded with David Hennessy and Hongli Feng as our PIs, and they were agricultural economists at Iowa State University. And I got connected to them because they had a USDA project up in the Dakotas looking at, I think it is basically climate projections and crop yields and the way that that might affect how much land goes into conservation reserve program. Then this project that we are working on for the North Central Climate Science Center came out of a proposal that they had submitted to the Landscape Conservation Cooperative. And what they decided to propose to that group was to look at satellite data as well as the costs of converting land that is not in production to go into production, and begin to look at the economics behind the decision-making and to be able to provide a predictive capability to determine where the most likely land to go from out of production into production might be. And they included me in their proposal because I have connections here from previous work with the National Climate, or NCCSC, and because then we could also discuss some more climate variability related to the yield modeling. So ultimately, the goal of this project is to look at the dynamics of land use switching. It uses satellite data to identify when land use switches have occurred, and it is going to model the factors behind when those land use switches occurred using economic data and weather variability data as well as commodity price data. We hope to be able to address land switching as it relates to production for corn, soybean, and hay. And at present, we've done a little bit of work with some corn background. So as Jeff has said, we started this out with Dave Hennessy and Hongli Feng as PIs, and they have since moved to Michigan State University. Per the rules of these consortiums, the PI needs to be within the university consortium, and Michigan State University is not, so we're going through some paperwork to switch over. Until that paperwork is finished, then we don't have the funds yet to hire any graduate students or even to really travel. So what we have done is we have been able to borrow from graduate students working on other projects and just being timely. And when we decided to travel with leveraging off of travel into that Dakotas region that was already planned to do some groundwork. And again, I'm glad to hear that for Jeff, this is the first time to do a switch in PIs as well, and that it's not just me being quite befuddled by the whole process. I am, and I admit that I'm not exactly an administrative genius, so it does take a while for me to catch on to steps of administrative processes. But we're proceeding, and I think we now have a solution in mind, and we're pushing forward, and we should be able to hire graduate students here by December. So here's the quick list of accomplishments we have made. David?
Yeah, you need to go to Quick Start and share your screen, Chris, if you could.
Quick Start.
Wait a minute. How did?
Oh, share screen. I see it.
Chris Anderson. Yeah. There we go. Thank you. And just for the sake of trying to make sure we get through all of these, I'd ask people to keep it to about 7 or 8 minutes, leave a few minutes for question and answer, and that way we'll get to all 5 new projects. And if you're not talking, please go to mute or mute your phone, please.
Yep, I'll go quickly now through this after I belabored the background on it. And I'll
Fair enough.
my cord. Okay, so our accomplishments so far is that David and I traveled to Bismarck, North Dakota, on August 18th and 19th, and we began our meetings with private land managers to begin understanding their priorities, the way they look at climate variability, the way they look at their conservation programs, and how they work with landowners. The managers we met with are at Ducks Unlimited, Delta Waterfowl Foundation, USDA, ARS Northern Great Plains Lab, the North Dakota Game and Fish Department, Fish and Wildlife Service, HAPIT, and the Plains and Prairie Pothole LCC. Each one had very different perspectives, actually, on how they judge conservation priorities. Ducks Unlimited and Delta Waterfowl were the most similar in that they are solely focused on preserving the habitat for ducks and waterfowl that also do well in those habitats. What we definitely learned from meeting with them, 4 items from the Bismarck trip, all those groups emphasize the need for landowner buy-in. All of their conservation programs, they feel, have to be palatable to the landowners across North Dakota, and not just in the moment, but to have a legacy of being, of not leaving an aftertaste of the program. They don't want to lose generations down the road. So they are very mindful to work closely with landowners where appropriate. They maybe have loud conversations and really advertise their successes in conservation. Elsewhere, they have very quiet conversations and allow landowners to continue to not advertise that their land has come under an easement. Ducks Unlimited and Delta waterfowl in particular are very focused on spring habitat for ducks during their nesting period. And this basically consists of allowing for there to be small ponds scattered across the landscape. Ducks are very territorial. That means if you had a huge pond or a huge reservoir, a single duck pair would try to take control of that entire reservoir. Whereas if you have many, many small ponds, then you can have many, many more duck pairs. So they definitely focus their easement programs on making sure that the small, temporary ponds are not permanently drained. One of the efforts by Delta Waterfowl is actually a test conservation program. It's designed after the USDA CRS program, or CSR program. And these are typically 5-year contracts rather than permanent easement contracts. And they think that this flexibility will be much more appealing to the landowners. So that's one point of divergence between Ducks Unlimited and Delta Waterfowl. Ducks Unlimited push for the 99-year easement, whereas Delta Waterfowl has built a great deal of support from the North Dakota agricultural community all the way up to the highest levels of government in North Dakota behind this idea of having shorter-term easements similar to the USDA CSR program. So what we have worked on besides going to Bismarck is developing, I mentioned this in the first slide, we're developing a focus group survey, and the purpose of our focus groups will be to quantify the costs from farmers who have made land switching or from farmers who are thinking about land switching and have given some consideration to its cost. And that way we'll be able to inform our satellite land switching model. Before we've gotten to that part, well, let me just say I think our focus groups, one will probably commence in probably January. We have lined up partners who can help us identify potential farmers to participate in our focus groups, and will likely make a trip back to South Dakota and possibly North Dakota to be at the focus groups and to be able to meet with the farmers and gather the information. In the meantime, we have done some more background information with yield modeling. We have worked on county-level yield to get a sense of what weather factors relate to the variability in yield in North Dakota, South Dakota. At the moment, we've started just with corn, but again, we expect to get into soybean and hay. Our preliminary analysis has found that soil moisture seasonality and consecutive extreme temperature days during July and August are 2 very important climate variables. I think soil moisture seasonality is really important because that also relates to the drainage problem that the Ducks Unlimited and Delta Waterfowl are trying to prevent. So a question that I have for the climate drivers team is how do we represent soil moisture in our empirical model? Ag economists are used to working with the Palmer Drought Severity Index. When we get into some climate scenarios, we may not have that sort of information. So we have a little bit of a conundrum of how to represent soil moisture in our empirical yield models. And we're just wondering if there is some sort of best practice or some opinion that the climate drivers team has developed. Finally, when we do get to the climate projections, one idea that we're thinking about is to use scenarios based upon the global mean temperature threshold rather than using a window in time. And the reason for this is because we know that humidity and rainfall change with the global average temperature. So in this way, we can relate our scenarios to the physical mechanism that relates climate change to the water dynamics of the region. So I can get into more details on that some other time, and I'm also interested to know what the Climate Drivers team thinks of that. This is loosely based off of some work that Captain Aho has done with drought and spring under global average temperature in the Midwest. And then I think this was also linked into maybe some work that they are doing with FIAs in the South Central. That's a quick overview, and I think I've hit the time limit pretty well. So thanks again, Jeff, for helping us work through this paperwork. And if there are any questions, feel free to email me. And thanks for your time.
Yeah, great, Chris. And USGS makes even simple accounting things hard. So you throw them something a little bit different, and it's a whole new ball of wax. So we'll patiently work through that. I appreciate your help doing so. Good. Then maybe we'll take the question, just so noted for the physical climate team on that soil moisture. There's also Gabriel Sine that sits at the North Central that might be able to chime in on that. But let's table that so we can move on to the landscape connectivity. I guess, Meredith, I'm assuming you would present on this. I don't know if Steve is even on. Great.
Yeah, I can give a quick overview. Let's see. So to share my screen, I just hit this.
You should. Yep. Looks like that's moving. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I'm going to just kind of breeze through some slides that I put together actually for a presentation to our partners a couple of months ago to kind of get everybody on the same page around the project. So this will double well as a kind of progress report check-in. So just as a reminder, the main objectives of this project are first to conduct a climate change vulnerability assessment of landscapes that are expected to be crucial for wildlife connectivity in the U.S. Northern Rockies, looking at both the landscape level and then at focal species that were selected by our partners within those landscapes. And then to use that assessment to develop some decision-relevant adaptation strategies for how our partners can work with those results to incorporate climate change adaptation into their existing management plans. So right now we're working on the climate change vulnerability assessment. We are working on applying projections of future biome distributions based on dynamic vegetation models to these connectivity landscapes that we have from a model from Dave Theobald that I'll show in a minute. We're also compiling expert knowledge on sensitivity of focal species that were selected by our partners to climate change and biome transitions in response to climate change. And then we'll be assessing adaptive capacity more in the context of kind of landscape level fragmentation due to human land use and risks from roads that have been previously modeled. So let's see, the connectivity models we're using are at the biome level. These are models produced by Dave Theobald in previous work. And what we'll be doing is looking at change in vegetation at the biome level based on two existing dynamic vegetation models, one newly released from Sarah Schaefer, and the other, the NC2 model that's been shared with us by Dominique Bachelet. So we're in progress doing the exposure analysis right now. We expect to have some metrics, and these are example metrics looking within connectivity zones connecting large intact blocks of vegetation, but we're discussing doing this more at the level of management units that will be more relevant for the management partners we're working with. But these are kind of the types of metrics we're looking at for exposure within the zones or units that we choose to do the analysis at. We're looking at sensitivity of this group of focal species that we narrowed down from focal species that have been identified previously by the various management partners that we're working with. So this is kind of the short list that we've agreed on at this point through a series of calls. We've been checking in with our partners on monthly calls throughout the project. And we're working on compiling sensitivity information from the climate change sensitivity database, some additional analyses that Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks have done focused on Montana, and kind of bringing that information together to get estimates of sensitivity of these focal species within the geography that we're focused on. And And then we're using a couple of existing models to look at adaptive capacity. So this is a model of degree of human modification across the landscape that, again, Dave Theobald has produced that incorporates a lot of different sources of land use change. And then a previous model that we produced based on wildlife carcass data to estimate risk of roads to wildlife across our study area. So these components will be combined in a work session that we have scheduled for February, early February. We're putting together all the analysis pieces first, and then we'll meet with our partners actually at the Resource for Advanced Modeling in Fort Collins in February to look at how these things overlap, how we want to score them and combine these pieces to get what our partners feel are reasonable representations of vulnerability of focal species and connectivity zones across our study area. So as part of that workshop, we'll focus on identifying some priorities, and that might vary across focal species and across the partners that we're working with, but those will be the focus of developing adaptation strategies that our partners can incorporate into their existing management plans. So that's kind of where we are. I'm trying to keep this short and leave time for questions if you guys have any.
Thanks, Meredith. And just, could you remind me the dates? I want to make sure we've got it reserved and blocked off in the RAM if they're set for the February meeting.
February 3rd and 4th is what I think I got on the schedule.
Okay. Looking at the wrong year. Okay, great. Any quick questions? We're going to stay under time for Meredith before we move on to the sagebrush distribution project. Okay, great. And I think Ben's on the line. Ben, are you going to present on your project or someone else?
Yep, I'm ready to present on this.
Great. I think if you just pick it and then go to the quick start, you can share your desktop.
Okay. Okay, is the screen shared?
It says it's your screen. I don't see anything yet. There we go. Estimated the bioclimate niche of 3 subspecies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is it. Okay, so we started the project in June, and their project is to look at the climate impacts and climate vulnerability of sagebrush. And the approach that we're taking is to use a multi-model approach where we're using species distribution modeling, a demographic model, and a dynamic vegetation model as independent approaches for estimating the climate vulnerability. So we're working with Peter Adler at Utah State, and then Cameron Aldridge and Beth Bradley, who's working on the fire aspects for us. And the end result of the project, we plan to have some synthesized vulnerability index of sagebrush to climate that then feeds into management plans and things like this. So we've hired Katie Renwick, who did a PhD at CSU, and she's the postdoc on the project who's doing a lot of the data analysis and DGBM modeling. So what we've spent a lot of time working on is parameterizing and developing a Artemisia shrub for the DGBM. And so this figure is simply showing the bioclimatic niche of 3 different Artemisia subspecies, and or Artemisia tridentata subspecies. And so an issue that we've had is that a lot of the data sets of presence absence of sagebrush are not provided at the subspecies level, and so this is something that we've worked on in terms of how to represent kind of the physiology of the different subspecies within LPJ gusts. and LPJ Guess is the name of the DGBM that we're running. Let's see. So we've been working on parameterizing the bioclimatic MIPS based on different presence-absence data sets. The next step was to implement an updated demographic model of survival for sagebrush, and this has been done working with Daniel Schlepfer, who was a PhD student in Bill Lowenroth's group, and there they developed a detailed survival model using a variety of climatic indices. And so this has now been kind of transferred over to the LPJ Guess model. And so roughly at this stage, we're matching Daniel's results. So the figure on the right shows the presence absence, with red being high presence and green being a lower presence or total absence. And overall, we're kind of matching the observed range and also the simulated range from Daniel's work. We're working with the ReGap, the GAP, and the Landfire presence absence data sets, and so we have pretty good coverage now of the full range to use as a benchmark. And then we've developed several metrics to help us understand the model performance based on the observations. And so at this point, we've transitioned now from working with the bioclimatic data and the demographic data to work on the ecophysiology of the shrub and to describe the ecophysiological parameters in LPJ Guess. And so LPJ Guess represents photosynthesis, respiration, carbon allocation, and so we can use observations of NPP and climatic gradients of NPP as another way to benchmark the model. And so I think that is it for the slides. We have a workshop coming up in a couple of weeks that'll be in Salt Lake, where Peter Adler's group are located, and so there we're going to start doing some idealized climate sensitivity runs to get an idea of how the SDM, the DGBM, and the demographic model compare with one another in terms of the climatic sensitivities. And then we've also developed our own kind of downscale climate products, but most likely we do a comparison with the CSC climate projections and make a decision about how to move forward with those. And so Katie Renwick attended the Boulder meeting on climate downscaling, and so we have some ideas about how to kind of synthesize our work with what the CSC is doing. And we expect to have the physiology incorporated into the model in the next month or two, and then we move forward with some of the biomodeling, where we have a mechanistic description of fire and how fire regimes are influenced by different fuel loadings from cheatgrass, for example, and what the feedbacks are on sagebrush survival under different climatic regimes. So that's where we are.
Good, thanks a lot, Ben. I have a question about the downscale climate. Is there, that can range anywhere from a 5-year, multi-million-dollar project to maybe something a little less, what I'm envisioning. So I was just kind of curious of what tweaking are you doing and how much are you starting from scratch versus taking advantage of something and then sort of maybe just flagging it for the foundational science climate team to be aware and make sure we're kind of doing something that's consistent.
Right. So we use the statistical downscaling approach. So computationally, it's pretty quick to do. And what we needed cloud cover, air temperature, precipitation data at a monthly time interval, going from kind of historic to the future for the different RCPs. So 1901 or 1850 to 2100, and I think part of the issues that we had with that, a lot of the products that are out there don't really contain all those criteria that we need for the model simulations. So we ended up downscaling the projections ourselves, but before we start using them, we'll make some comparisons with the MACA data set and others that are out there to see, just to make sure that our projections don't have any significant biases, and if they do, try and figure out why they're compared to the others that are out there. But this is kind of an ongoing thing, and so Katie Redwood from the Boulder meeting, we want to touch base with the foundational science area to make sure the projections that we're using are consistent with what you have, or to simply talk more with you guys about using the climate forecast that you've developed.
That sounds great, and it's good to see Katie did add quite a bit to the conversation on the ecological response model component of that regional climate model. So glad to have her there, and that sounds reasonable to move forward.
Yeah, so we'll probably be in touch with you before we start doing the forecast simulations on that.
Sounds good.
All right.
Okay, any other questions for Ben? We then go on. If Amy, if you're presenting for your project, you could share your screen or just discuss the scenario planning project. I understand you had a good meeting last week up there in North Dakota.
Yeah. I just shared my screen, so hopefully it's showing up.
Yes, indeed. Thanks.
Okay. So kind of like the first project we heard about, we started out the project in full swing in August when we visited our two focal areas, which are the orange circles in this map here. The first one in North Dakota, central North Dakota, is basically centered on Knife River Indian Villages, National Historic Site, a relatively small park at the confluence of the Knife and Missouri rivers. And then our second site is centered on Badlands National Park in the southwestern portion of South Dakota. And the goal of the project is basically to explore the means to make the scenario planning process that the National Park Service has been using for 7-8 years now a bit more quantitative, and therefore or with the hopes that it will satisfy some of the needs of the managers that go through these processes to base decisions on a bit more quantitative information than the more expert opinion-based type of work that they've been doing so far. So our first step was in August to go meet with the not only the parks but the groups that work with them on similar issues in those focal areas. So at Knife River, and at those meetings talk about the resource issues that they're most concerned about when it comes to climate change, and begin talking about what aspects of climate they would find most challenging in managing those resources. So in North Dakota at Knife River, the site was established specifically to protect and preserve archaeological sites of where 3 affiliated tribes had a major village site for thousands of years, as well as to provide a cultural landscape for visitors and the tribes themselves to have or to understand what it might have looked at during the time that those villages were active. And then in Badlands area, we went in there thinking that grazing and specifically vegetation and bison management issues were going to be the major issue addressed there, but the park was actually established to protect So we had a lot of discussion about those issues as well, and when it comes to the climate aspects that both of these sites would find challenging. Severe flooding events, or for example, especially in North Dakota and in South Dakota, drought affecting climate or affecting vegetation production, and then also severe, or I should say extreme precipitation events that lead to erosion events in the Badlands features. So in August, we worked out what the primary resource issues that we would focus on would be at the two sites. And then since then, we've been doing quite a bit with the North Dakota area sorry, I'm trying to switch between presentations here, to build climate scenarios that are distinct, challenging, plausible, and for the managers of the site to work through what some of their management actions might be in different situations. We used the Bureau of Reclamation downscaled data, so the BCSD or Maurer data set, to basically categorize the CMIP3 projections that were available according to how much projected change there is in temperature and precipitation for our target period, which is relatively close because that was what was relevant to the managers. And then from those, we chose 4 scenarios that met the criteria of being challenging and divergent and plausible. And basically, we used information not only about that mean change in annual temperature and precipitation, but also especially looking at seasonal or month-to-month change or differences in the 4 scenarios, looking for example, one that had a relatively soggy spring, thinking that would affect flooding quite a bit. Severe sustained drought was a major issue that they wanted to address. And then also looking at the temporal variability of the different scenarios, realizing, of course, that each projection isn't really a forecast of any kind, but just using each of these to provide a storyline that the managers can use to work through the management issues of for example, in the uplands at Knife River, they need to provide, or they want to maintain this cultural landscape into the future. But what does that mean in a future that might have a very different climate than, say, the time when Lewis and Clark came through the villages, and the individual plant species that were being used by the tribes at that time, versus a future where it's much drier, where some of those species might not be sustainable, for example, those that are more associated with the tall grass prairie region as opposed to the short grass. So working through, basically through participatory discussions, how they would address these 4 different climate scenarios with, for example, trying to resist climate change, trying to direct their management to accommodate specific climate changes, or just going with the flow and testing out those different strategies in the different climate scenarios. Some of them just don't work in the scenarios. So in Knife River, our major aspect of getting more quantitative was selecting those 4 climate projections as opposed to kind of a multi-model consensus that has been used by the Park Service in the past, and then also using more quantitative information on the response of the systems, for example, a change in flow during the summertime or in the snowpack that influences flooding in the wintertime, or I should say wintertime influenced early spring flooding. Again, using just the available data on the Bureau of Reclamation site. So Jonathan Friedman, our hydrologist on the team, could tell you about some of his trials with using that data. It didn't work very well for CMIP-5 projections, and that's why we stuck with CMIP-3 ones. And then Badlands, we're going to have a similar workshop that we had Knife River in early January, and in that one we're working with Brian Miller at Colorado State and the Climate Science Center and Leonardo Frid of Apex Consulting Agency to work on much more detailed state and transition simulation models addressing the grazing, climate, vegetation interactions based on the NRCS ecological site descriptions and the state and transition models included in those. So that's about it.
Thanks, Amy. And I heard from Brian coming back last week that an interesting comment from the park superintendent was something like, really never thought about the management in this way, and that has really been sort of insightful for her. So that's kind of one of those comments maybe, for the foundational science team on adaptation impacts of human dimensions. How do we capture that type of, benefit to this type of project where we've really, you through your efforts have really changed the mindset of a given manager. But that was, at any rate, good to hear, and it sounded like it was a great workshop, and appreciate the report. Anyone have any questions? We got a minute or two before we move on to the Wind River project.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I was just wondering briefly, Amy, what sorts of issues you ran into in using the CMIP-5 instead of the CMIP-3 data?
Good question.
So the hydrological projections in terms of daily flows during the winter time, so there are flow data available on that Bureau of Reclamation site for the Hazen gauge at near Knife River. The CMIP-5 flows basically didn't correspond at all to what was actually observed. They were just, and they, when you, yeah, Jonathan is the one to talk to here, but basically he found that the flow data especially were not realistic, I think, in the summertime, and in the wintertime he used snow water equivalent as a proxy for winter flow, and it seemed like the CMIP-5 projections were basically melting all the snow way too early so that it didn't stick around and create a snowpack. But yeah, Jonathan Friedman would be the one to talk to about that.
Okay, great, thanks.
And Andrea Ray from NOAA was at the meeting, so I think that she and Jonathan are probably, I'm assuming, are talking, but yeah, maybe we'll follow up with Jonathan.
Yeah, when Andrea went to Joe Barsugli about that, I don't know if Joe, if you're on the line, but he said that definitely warrants further investigation.
It really does sound like something we want to.
This is Imtiaz here. Just wanted to, I was part of that email thread, and basically looked like the hydrologic model used for the CMIP-3 and CMIP-5 by the reclamation was different, and maybe that was one of the main cause of the differences. And one of the WIC person here at CU, Ben Livna, said that the new version of WIC was quite different from the previous version in terms of dealing with snowpack. So that's one of the challenges using this data set that where your CMIP data is downscaled and then run through these hydrologic model, and we just have the WIC hydrologic model for one, and then the different versions of WIC causing problems. So it's a bit of a challenge when using these outputs from the hydrologic model.
So is it safe to assume then that you know, what I think I'm hearing from the conversation is that the CMIP-5 climate data we're probably okay with, but that the VIC model, because of the revisions to it, needs some further testing?
That's correct, because it's the that's pretty much
great.
And so the bias correction process gets you the right data with respect to climate, and then what model you're using to get the hydrologic run going. That could cause a difference.
Great. That's reassuring. Thank you.
Yeah, it is. Good. And thanks, MTS, for that follow-up. Why don't we, Shannon, I believe you're going to talk about the Wind River project, if you can share your screen or talk to it.
Yes. Remind me how I do this, share my screen.
You should go to Quick Start in the upper left and do share your screen. In the middle then. Great. Looks like you're doing it. Yep, we got it.
All right, so the Wind River Indian Reservation Drought Preparedness Project, again, as a reminder, this is working with the two tribes there, the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes, to help them do assessment of their drought risk and ultimately in drought capacity building, monitoring, and planning, working most closely with the Joint Tribal Water Engineers Office and Water Resources Control Board. So it has multiple components to it. First and foremost, the ethnographic interviews that I've been doing in the social science, really documenting local knowledge, working with the managers to help drive the rest of the assessment. I've done 20 in-depth interviews to date. And then the integrated assessment across the social vulnerability, the physical climate, and ecosystems impacts. There's a capacity building and training component, developing the climate and drought summaries as a decision support tool. We've now done 4 versions of that. The last one was in September. We've been training staff at the Tribal Water Engineers Office to ultimately take over the creation of those summaries. In fact, they input into the last summary for the first time. The goal is, or target is, a reservation-wide drought plan that's cross-sectoral and across the whole reservation, and then ultimately doing a project evaluation with the help of Beth McNee from Western Water Assessment at CU Boulder-RESA. So again, the project has a bunch of local technical advisors along with a distributed network of the technical assessment and project collaborators. We've organized the assessment teams into the sort of 3 teams, one being the human vulnerability and adaptation, led by myself and Cody Knutson, the ecological impacts team led by Jennifer Wellman, who's the Wyoming EPSCoR representative there at Wind River Reservation, and the physical climate team, who's led by Mark Svoboda, and now also Imtiaz Rangwala is co-leading the physical climate team. So just again, a quick review of the vulnerability assessment objectives. We're doing this participatory, interdisciplinary, social ecological systems assessment, really engaging through co-production the resource managers to develop decision support tools, and engaging the tribal community, youth, and elders. A lot of that is happening with the Wyoming EPSCoR leveraging that we're doing, and then ensuring that the outcomes are actually actionable for drought preparedness. And again, the evaluation is helping with that, and then ultimately we hope to create something that's transferable, looking at best practices and lessons learned to other tribes and beyond. So the vulnerability assessment, again, is really being driven by the managers and the social science. I am in the process of finishing coding. I've done the first round of coding of all the interviews now. I just did more interviews a couple months ago, so we've just finished coding those. My grad student is checking that, and then we're going to be moving into the analysis, the outcomes of which will help guide the climate assessment, which is going to be looking both at historical drought analyses and future climate projections, and then the ecological assessment. Those two teams are kind of, in one sense, waiting to see the outcomes of the interviews, but also in the meantime, kind of cataloging and collecting available data sets and starting to think about what kinds of questions to ask of that data. So a lot of you have already seen this, so I won't go into detail again, but just as a reminder that the Wind River case is also connected to the broader foundational science adaptation team project, the DRY project, drought risk and adaptation in the interior. So the interviews are the same at Wind River as we've done in Southwest South Dakota and Northwest Colorado, looking at risk perceptions of drought, impacts, decisions, indicators, adaptive capacities, and barriers. The initial assessment of what will be done for the ecosystem impacts is going to be focusing on these different habitats, glacial, whitebark pine, and sagebrush habitats, and then some of the species of interest are listed here: deer, elk, moose, bighorn sheep, bison, and fisheries. And then I don't have Mark Svoboda's slide looking at drought indicators and historical climate, so I didn't include that, but this is a slide from Imtiaz and Candida looking at some of the projections work that they are going to be doing, and they're on the line, so if you want more detail about specific data sets, you can ask them. And then assessing relationships among components of the water cycle and climate projections, looking particularly at snowpack, snow water equivalent, actual evapotranspiration, and soil moisture, and then looking at that relevant to station-based data. So a couple of things that we're working on. One is I mentioned in the slide, at the bottom of the slide, the EDDI drought tool, which is the Evaporative Demand Drought Index, working with Mike Hobbins at NOAA to look at what that EDDI tool can tell us in terms of more sort of local regional scale drought development. And we actually had a workshop in October at the reservation with water managers where we did a little bit of ground truthing with that tool, looking at what the EDDI said over the course of the 2015 irrigation season and how that compared to what manifested locally. There was actually a lot of positive feedback in terms of what the EDDI said relative to the U.S. Drought Monitor, which was behind what was actually happening at the reservation. They did, in fact, end up having a bit of a hydrological agricultural drought at the end of the season there because of low snowpack back in the spring, despite the very, very wet May that they had. And so a couple of things we're working on is a two-page summary on the EDDI for a broader audience that Imtiaz and Candida and Joe and Mike have been working on, and then Candida and I have started to scope out some kind of a manuscript or white paper, probably a manuscript, looking in more detail at the sort of the evolution of the 2015 season using the interviews and local observations along with these other drought indicators. So I think that's it for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Shannon. It's great to see that moving full steam ahead. A lot of good work there. Any questions for Shannon?
Yeah, Steve Running here.
Hey, Steve.
At long last, the Mod 16 daily 1 kilometer evapotranspiration data set is going to start being generated by the Goddard Modus Land team. And so there should be at least that version of an ET data set over this whole land area coming right along.
That's good to know, and I'll make sure that Gabriel, I don't think he's on the line, Gabriel Sine, who's kind of tracking our ET products for us, is aware and starts pulling that. It's going to be distributed from Goddard?
Oh, no. It'll be a regular Modus Land data distribution.
Right.
And of course, it'll be computed from 2000 to the present. And so once they catch up to the forward processing, we'll have, what, a 14-year data set.
Mm-hmm. Great. And so we should...
That's great. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, we could take it offline, but I do want to follow up with what the topo weather, as far as having a precip data set, possibly an ET, and then we have more of a complete data set that then some folks might try to downscale too. I think people have been hesitant to downscale the topo weather data with it just being temperature. So maybe that's a kind of offline conversation with Steve or Jared or others.
Yeah, why don't I send you an email on this after we're done and give you an update of what's going on.
Good, because I'm going to push Levi Brecky or others to sort of do a downscaling once we got that. So I'll say that'll be good.
Okay.
So I think Jill is showing something from the monthly check-in that we wanted. We got about 2 minutes left before the hour. Jill, do you want to describe what we're a little addition to the monthly check-in spreadsheet to help us? We get asked at least quarterly, sometimes more, for what are we doing for it's kind of part of Secretary Jewell's engaging youth or a young scientist, early career scientist. And instead of having to ask you guys a different data call, Jill kind of devised a way here to make it part of the monthly check-in. So if you could talk to that, Jill, and let people know kind of what those new fields are showing there.
Yeah, sure. So on the right side here of each page of the monthly check-in spreadsheet, I added where I would like everyone to record information about their fellows, and fellows are defined here as undergrad or grad students, postdocs, or other basically early career researcher. And I've added some things on several of the pages, people that I know about, but I would encourage everyone each month as they do, well, for the initial one to just go ahead and put in fellows who are working on your projects. But and then in the future, as people come on or go off, you can change this to P for past or add C for current, just so we have a better tracking system for fellows who are associated with our center.
Thanks, Jill. Again, just so people know, we are asked for this frequently, so it's going to help us, and they'll hopefully avoid having to ask you repeatedly for it and do a better job tracking it. I know it's pretty dynamic when you talk about master's level students or summer interns. We want to track those, so please put them in and then just add C or current or previous if or past.
This is Ruben from Steve's lab, Ruben Banke, Steve's graduate student.
Hey, Ruben.
Hey, we are working on a downscaled humidity data set.
Okay.
That goes with the topo weather data set. In the future, that's going to be in the future. So.
Good. Good to know. Yeah, and let's make sure we stay in touch with where that is. I'll watch for the email from Steve and maybe include the others.
Okay.
Thanks for that update. Just a quick update. I know we're now at the hour. The national office is doing eco-drought workshops, rotating through all of the climate science centers. The first one was in Alaska. The next one is going to be in the North Central. It's going to be December 7th and 8th. I think, if they try to keep it to about 20 people, so some of you, I think we got the foundational science areas fairly well represented, and that will be, that's moving forward. We also have the Wildlife Conservation Society. We had the monthly check-in back in August where Molly Cross talked about how WCS does these adaptation trainings for actual projects for climate adaptation. That will be December 9th and 10th. I believe the Southwest Colorado project from the 2013 round is the only one from the management-focused projects that are going to be there, but it will be represented, and some of us from the Climate Science Center will be there. And then lastly, the Joint Stakeholder Committee is going to be on Friday, December 11th. So trying to bring the joint USDA Hub and North Central Climate Science Center federal stakeholder groups together. That's just an FYI. I think maybe I'll ask for people, if they have slides from today, if they could send them to maybe Jill and myself as PowerPoint or PDF, if it's okay to share, or what could be shared from those, feel free to edit it down. And then we'll have those that I could show to the folks at our joint stakeholder group. It's a lot of exciting work, and it's really encouraging, I think, to see how many of you have done workshops with with your stakeholders, and right at the beginning, trying to integrate them into the project, which is what we were after with this round of funding and kind of what we were looking for. So it's exciting to see that come out. Let me just open up if there's anything else from the group for the good of the order.
Jeff, it's Shannon. I just want to remind people that we do have another webinar today. We have the adaptation group webinar at 2 o'clock. We don't normally try and have back-to-back webinars in one day, but we had to reschedule that one because of our retreat last week. But that's going to be on the BLM Social Vulnerability Assessment Project that I and Corey Knapp are going to be giving.
Thanks for that reminder. And yeah, that got pushed back a week, and this one got pushed forward a week due to Thanksgiving. So sorry, folks, that we got back-to-back, but hopefully people interested are able to join. And one more call for anything from the table or around. Okay, with that, we'll sign off, and the next monthly check-in will be December 15th, again, a week earlier than the fourth Tuesday. We'll be doing it the third Tuesday, and we'll get an update from the 2013 projects, hearing from them, and maybe a little more time for the foundational science series. We'll only have 3. But with that, thanks, folks, and we'll be in touch.